This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. Today is October 20th, 2022, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin in the spring of 2020. Every week, Jean Lawler and I are honored to be able to host these great webinars of interest to mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and pretty much anybody who negotiates as part of their day-to-day activity. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see. And supporting food banks and fighting food insecurity all around the world. One of my favorite parts of the program each week is when we report on the amount of money that our generous audiences have contributed so far. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honor?
My pleasure, Jeff. Hello, everyone, and good morning. It's a great day. $320,000, $320,450 and 95 cents. So $320,450 and 95 cents are donations of which we have been advised. So fantastic. We're getting close to that 325 mark. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. That's so generous. It's just great. And today we have another great presentation by Mark Leonard. Mark is the General Counsel of Sunsweet. Yes, this Sunsweet, the people who bring you the amazing prunes. And I tell you, Mark, they're a very important part of my diet. I can't live without them.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jeff.
I eat them every day. Let me give you an introduction that goes beyond the prune. Mark is so good. The General Counsel of Sunsweet Growers, one of the world's largest producers of dried fruit. He's responsible for all company litigation and all legal matters relating to global brand protection, intellectual property, corporate governance, contract manufacturing, claims substantiation, data privacy and security, e-commerce, marketing, international distribution, and commercial contracts. That is quite a portfolio. Mark previously served as General Counsel for the Jelly Belly Candy Company, where from July 2015 to December 21, he was responsible for all the above matters, as well as licensing and ingredient and packaging regulatory compliance. Before Mark joined Jelly Belly, he was in private practice at Davis & Leonard LLP, a boutique intellectual property litigation and transactional firm he co-founded in Sacramento in 2003. So we love it when we have experienced in-house counsel on the New Possibilities Hour. We love the insights that are brought to bear on all kinds of matters relating to the relationship between inside and outside counsel, as well as the negotiation and settlement of disputes. So with that, Mark Leonard, if you would please tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're able to do so, and then on to the substantive presentation. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff. I have to apologize to everybody for my voice. I managed to come down with a cold, and so apologies for sounding like a frog during this presentation. But it's technically not a food bank, but the Food Literacy Center is the food-related charity that I have selected. They educate young children often in underserved communities on healthy eating practices and how to enjoy fruits and vegetables, maybe some basic cooking. And it's just been it's a fantastic organization. They've just recently opened their first campus, actually next to a elementary school in a underserved part of Sacramento, and they're just doing fantastic work. So I highly recommend everybody to check them out, and if you could support them, I and they would greatly appreciate it.
Okay, on with the show, Mark. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. So, when Jeff first approached me about this and thought about different negotiation tactics, it occurred to me that how I negotiate being in-house is a little bit different than when I was in private practice, because I have a wider range of parties that I'm negotiating with. Obviously, in private practice, you've got opposing parties or opposing counsel that you're dealing with, and that's a certain technique. But when you're in-house, you have a much broader range of potential negotiations. One of the first that comes to mind is your customer. Often dealing with price increases, and how you approach that is going to be a little bit different than how you approach, say, a potential potential litigant or the opposing party. So coming into it, understanding the nature of what you're negotiating about will definitely affect the style and technique of your negotiation. So again, for example, with customers, oftentimes you've got long-standing relationships, and so you rely on that, and it's obviously more cordial, and you don't want to take an aggressive initial response or posture with your customer, obviously, versus, say, a vendor. Also, something I didn't do a lot of negotiating with when I was in private practice, but I do a lot of that now as in-house. And with vendors, I like to know as much as I possibly can about the sector, so that I can assess different players in that market, and then find out, okay, I know enough about this to move forward to want to talk with this vendor. But knowing the strengths and weaknesses of, for example, looking at contract management software is a big area right now with in-house. I know my colleagues and I are constantly talking back and forth about different vendors that we're working with, and so knowing the players in that space, and then being able to say, okay, well, I know all of this technology is basically the same, so what's the price differentiation? And to be able to go in and say, okay, yes, okay, this is the number that you're giving me, but what is that based on? And really don't be afraid to ask tough questions about, why are you coming to me with this number? What are your costs? What is your, what is the margin that you're really looking to get here? And it's surprisingly effective to get them to come down off of their initial numbers. Another trick with vendors, not trick, but even when I get into a relationship with a vendor, I let them know, hey, when this contract's up for renewal in 3 years or whatever the term is, it's my policy to go out into this sector and look at other vendors in the same space, to let them know that going in, so that they don't get complacent, thinking that just because they got the initial, they got us initially, now they're going to have us forever. And it's been pretty effective in getting to have better terms upon renewal. Sometimes the contract's going to call for certain scheduled price increases, and I was able to ameliorate some of those because they knew that I'm going to go back to market and potentially go with a competitor. Other negotiations that you face in-house, thankfully not as frequently, is disputes with, especially in the intellectual property world, which is what I'm most familiar with. Oftentimes, I've been fairly fortunate in both the confectionery industry and the dried fruit industry. Most of the players, the large players, know each other and can work, pretty well with each other. So it's when there is a dispute, I like to say you can always escalate. So there's no point in coming into a negotiation with guns blazing, especially in a situation with it's a competitor, and it may not be an egregious thing that they've done in terms of violating your intellectual property. It could be accidental. I had a situation several years ago with the trade association for the confectionery industry is the National Confectioners Association, and I was at a NCA meeting in Washington D.C. when I got an email from one of our sales folks at Jelly Belly saying, "Oh my gosh, look what Mars is doing," and it was a packaging for peanut M&Ms that used one of our trademarks. I happened to be sitting next to an attorney from Mars, and I leaned over and I said, "Hey, can we talk?" And she said, "Uh-oh, what'd we do?" And the whole thing was worked out within, a couple of phone calls and emails, versus oftentimes in the intellectual property world, the initial infringement is met with a somewhat of a fire and brimstone letter. And, that approach would not have been as effective as simply saying, "Hey, can we talk about this?" It doesn't work all the time. That's certainly not necessarily the case internationally in both the dried fruit and confectionery business. Oftentimes you're dealing with serious infringement, and again, these are food products, so there's a significant health and safety risk, and so you take a much harder approach when coming at a potential infringer. Jeff, what are some other techniques you think might be pertinent to the in-house world that you don't hear much about on these calls?
Well, a lot of times, Mark, we're very interested in the mediation context and the relationship between the outside counsel and the inside counsel, the outside counsel and the in-house counsel, and the balancing of interests within a corporation. We often hear the general counsel talk about their own need to be kind of a mini mediator, accommodating different interests that exist within a corporate defendant. Can you talk about things that give us some insights into that dynamic that might help us when we're mediating?
Sure, that's a great point. People often say, "Well, you're lucky with in-house, you've only got one client." Well, no, I've got sales, I've got marketing, I've got IT, I've got QA. The different business units have different needs, and you communicate differently with them when you're involved in a negotiation. So obviously on the, I've talked about the vendor side, working very closely with IT on any, tech-related vendors. On the sales side, it's often, vendors who may be coming in to run an ad campaign or something. And there's always, this pressure to do things as quickly as possible. And, I try to come at it as being very business-minded. I don't want to be the department of no, which oftentimes in-house counsel get labeled. And so I want to know as much about the transaction as possible, or the proposed transaction. And that may, that's going to involve, asking some questions and making sure I'm up to speed on, what exactly is this vendor going to do? What one of the worst things that in-house face is, it's the 11th hour and a contract is dropped on you, and whatever business unit, let's say it's sales, is saying, "Hey, look this over and bless it." I'm like, I don't know anything about this. I need to have some context. So for example, right now, data privacy, data security is a very big issue. And so anytime I brought up the sales context, dealing with a potential vendor who's going to be doing any kind of online advertising for us, making sure that agreement addresses, all of the various data privacy issues. If it's in the EU, it's GDPR. If it's in California, it's the CPRA, and there's other states that have other data privacy regulatory schemes. And educating the business unit on these issues and say, don't just say, "Okay, well, no, this, X, Y, and Z is why this is bad. Here's what we need because we have these data privacy issues," and to make them aware of it so that, going forward, they understand what I'm looking for. Versus, let's say on the operations side, potential new piece of equipment or a new supplier. Again, educating the business unit to let them know what I'm looking for and why I'm concerned about it. And at the end of the day, to say, okay, I'm not happy with, these couple of issues in the agreement. Here's why. But at a certain point, excuse me, it becomes a business decision to move forward. I mean, unless it's presenting some kind of existential threat, which is obviously very rare. But at some point as in-house, we have to say, yes, our client is the company, but the company needs and the management needs to make its own decisions, and we inform those decisions about whether to move forward when there's risk, and to try to explain the level of risk. But at the end of the day, again, I don't want to be a department of no, and so I try to work very hard with the various business departments so that they understand my pain points, especially when we're talking about indemnities and warranties and things of that nature, with NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. If it's not mutual, well, okay, then what are we potentially telling the other side that might, what confidential information might we be disclosing? But again, to talk with them so that they understand that. And I think what I've seen is they appreciate the education, and that I'm trying to work with them to get the deal done. I'm not trying to throw up roadblocks. And so that's certainly different than what I was dealing with in terms of negotiations in private practice, which for the most part is the negotiation of disputes, particularly intellectual property disputes. So that's certainly one big difference.
So if you're in a dispute, do you find yourself as general counsel serving as a kind of mediator yourself when perhaps there are issues that come up between different departments within the organization?
Very good question. Yes. Other than IT, I can't think of an internal department that touches every other department within a company other than legal and IT. And so, procurement might be saying, oh, we got this great deal on this, whatever packaging. And, QA is saying, well, wait a minute, we've got all of these specs. We have to make sure that they meet. And so, procurement's, pressuring to get the deal done. QA is saying, wait, we need data to make sure it's, this thing's going to perform the way we think it is going to. Similarly, we just dealt with a situation at Sunsweet, looking at a new vendor. When I came on board, they were well down their way in negotiations with a particular vendor, and it was going to touch basically every department in terms of what the service that was being provided. I had experience in this area from Jelly Belly. I started asking questions about the performance of this, because we were in a kind of a beta with them, and I didn't like what I was hearing in terms of the answers. And so there was one business unit that was very pro this vendor, and everybody else was saying, well, wait a minute, this isn't working for us. And so I took a step back and I said, well, hey, let's I have some experience in this space. Let's talk with this other company and see if they could maybe provide a better solution. And so having to, the one unit that was very, gung-ho for this particular vendor, having to very carefully manage that relationship and say, no, it's nothing on you, but this solution isn't working for everybody, and we really need it to work for everybody. And ultimately got them on board, and we ended up going with the other vendor. But so things like that can happen. I'm trying to think some other examples. HR, certainly. Legal is usually working pretty closely with them. Operations maybe have for the last several years, many companies, especially in manufacturing spaces, have had trouble getting and retaining enough labor. And so they're they're pushing very hard to make potentially some questionable hires. And, we have to, educate them to say, okay, look, here's the cost of bringing somebody on board. And if they don't work out, if they're gone within 90 days, here's X amount of money that we've lost, trying to get this worker up to speed in their position. And so getting them to understand the cost of bringing on somebody who isn't going to work out is very helpful, so that they can say, okay, yes, we need these bodies, but maybe we should be more thoughtful about who we're actually bringing on. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of communication and maybe perhaps mediation within departments when you're in-house.
Mark, the way you describe it is a very, shall we say, left brain oriented, describing the facts and the all the circumstances, the financial considerations. There must be some right brain elements to it as well, in terms of dealing with strong emotions. You may have one group within a company, one faction that says they want to do what's best for the company. Another department says what they want is best for the company. And you, as general counsel, your client is the company, not any one faction or a department. And yet you must be dealing with some pretty strong emotions, as well as the factual considerations. What are effective techniques in your experience in dealing with high emotions?
You're absolutely right. You're dealing from a position of facts in trying to make your case and to get the various parties to understand the rational basis for what I'm recommending, or for what maybe a particular department is recommending. How you convey that is perhaps even more important. To come in and to be known as absolutely neutral, that you're not picking favorites. We're human beings. Naturally, there's going to be people that we more easily gravitate towards in a company because we have similar interests or whatever. But in fact, I'm dealing with this in a staffing situation where a very competent, very smart, very hardworking individual, very excited to come in and do what's best for the company in his eyes. And he's not understanding the way he's coming across is very arrogant, and that he is, stepping on a lot of toes. And so I have to go into that situation and say, look, this is, yes, you have some great ideas, but how you should approach it is much more, hey, I want to learn more about your department. I want to learn, how can legal more effectively, help serve your business unit. The very first thing I did when I came to Sunsweet was scheduled meetings with the various department heads and did exactly that, to say, here's how I interacted with your department when I was at Jelly Belly. What's your interactions been with legal? How can I help you? And to establish, very open lines of communication, so that when inevitably there is going to be a situation where you're in the situation of potentially mediating between two different departments, both of them know you're coming in as a neutral party, and that it's just that I have the company's best interests at heart, and try to, again, with facts, but convey them in such a way that perhaps the stronger minded party doesn't feel like they're being undercut. Like legal is taking sides. You never want to be in that position. And so it's definitely a difference between in-house and outside counsel or private practice. But it's very important to have those lines of communication, and for every business unit to know that you're going to be a neutral arbiter, and you're not going to be, favoring one department over another or one department head over another.
So before we talk a little more about mediation, a question comes to mind, Mark. What do you wish you had known when you were outside counsel? Because many of the people on this line and who will watch the recording are in the role of counsel, lawyers in law firms representing corporate clients. Now that you've been in-house for a good long time, what do you wish you had known when you were in a law firm?
Excellent question. One of the things that comes to mind is make sure you understand your contact within the company and their role in the organization in terms of, are they a GC that, probably maybe has significant independence, or is it, maybe a, lower level attorney in the legal department that is then reporting to their GC, or, who internally is receiving your information, to making sure that it is being, received by the right party. And knowing, ultimately who has the decision-making authority within the company. There were times when, dealing with intellectual property disputes, my contact may have been the general counsel, or if they didn't have in-house counsel, maybe somebody else in the executive suite, and us being on the same page on an issue, on a potential, settlement offer to make. And then all of a sudden at the 11th hour saying, no, that's not going to happen because, my CEO doesn't like it. And I'm like, well, then, I'm happy to get in front of your CEO and to explain this. And so, making sure that where the advice that you're giving is going within the company, it would be one. Another one is, I wish I knew more about some of my clients' businesses and to understand their motivations in a particular dispute. Is it just simply, it's a minor trademark dispute and doesn't really matter much to the company, or it's not really affecting their bottom line, or is this a significant risk to them in terms of really potentially affecting their profits? Oftentimes, clients get very excited about when you find an infringer and this is, oh my gosh, this is horrible. We need to come in guns blazing. And there were times in retrospect, I wish I had said, well, tell me more about how this is actually affecting your business so that I can advise them, more effectively to say, okay, yes, this is a problem, but the solution that you're proposing is going to be very expensive, and at the end of the day is probably not going to pencil out for you. You're not going to get in settlement what we're going to put into this dispute. And so understanding their business better would better inform me in giving that advice.
To whom would you address such questions if you could go back and do it?
I would say, hey, get me, if it's not coming from my contact, let's say a GC, to say, hey, can I get in front of your sales and marketing folks, or your operations folks, just to, and again, not billing for my time on doing this when I'm getting up to speed, because again, yeah, like you don't know where your information is going once you give it, to your contact within the company. Similarly, getting information out of the company through your contact, maybe it's getting filtered in such a way that you're not getting what you're really looking for. And so trying to have direct communications with those department heads in the company that can directly give you the information you're looking for. I wish I had done that more often.
So now that you're in the in-house counsel's chair, the general counsel's chair, Mark, would you react well if an outside lawyer said to you, it's very nice chatting with you about this, Mark, but actually I'd like to be talking to other people within the company and HR, sales and marketing, IT? Would you
Yeah,
feel that people were going over your head or dissing you?
obviously the way that that is done, the manner in which that request is conveyed has a lot to do with it. But yeah, there's been times when, actually several times, I'm getting a lot of questions from my outside counsel in a particular area, and rather than just convey those questions to the business department that is relevant, I'll say, hey, let's get on the phone together. This is going to be way more effective. Actually, now that I think about it, I do that quite often. And it also helps. I don't want necessarily, me to be the only person in the company that outside counsel is familiar with. Depending on the matter, they could be dealing with, let's say, marketing, especially when you're talking about claim substantiation and things like that. That comes up fairly frequently. To help establish a relationship between my outside counsel and head of marketing, and I'm obviously always part of those discussions, but so it's not just, oh, okay, well, Mark's got some outside attorney he uses for this stuff, but we don't really know who it is or why they're asking these questions. And so making that direct contact is first more efficient in conveying information, but also helping to build relationships.
And easier to do, I would assume, if you have long-term ongoing relationships with outside counsel as opposed to a new relationship or perhaps a one-shot relationship.
Yeah, in fact, I'm thinking back now in two different situations where in one case, I'm working with counsel that I've worked with for many years, and they needed some specific information. And so, and it was very easy because I'm used to working with them on getting them in touch with the right person and having a very good conversation versus a newer outside counsel that I was working with, and did the same situation. And internally, they were getting a little bit frustrated with her questions, and I realized, maybe I should have done a little bit more one-on-one with her before bringing in the business part, the department head that she wanted the information from, so that I was a little bit more familiar with her style, and I could, perhaps steer her a little bit better in the way that she was approaching the discussion. But yeah, happy to talk more about that, because I think, one of the things that I've learned a lot about is when you're in-house counsel, you get pitched a lot by outside counsel, and I've had some very good pitches and I've had some very poor pitches. And I think one of the first pieces of advice I would give to outside counsel that's looking to establish a relationship with in-house counsel is, don't assume your practice area is necessarily relevant to my business. Just because, especially you go to, like, for those of you familiar in the trademark world with INTA, the International Trademark Association, obviously everybody's there, they have trademark issues. Don't automatically assume you know what my trademark issues are just because you're a trademark practitioner. A story I like to tell, this actually happened at INTA in Boston a few years ago. And I was at a reception and an attorney came up, started talking to me, and she was from a jurisdiction where I already had counsel in that jurisdiction. Thank you, Jeff. And I said, oh, I already have counsel in your country. She's like, oh, that's fine. And she said, well, tell me more about your business. Tell me more about Jelly Belly. And it was a really good approach. She didn't push the issue and wanted to learn about the company, and not just about from the trademark side, like the business side. Well, like, what are issues that you face? And I was very impressed. And we exchanged information, and then she followed up about 2 weeks later, and and just to say, hey, it was great meeting you. If there's ever anything I can help with, let me know. But again, a very soft approach as opposed to a hard sell. And it turns out that I actually wasn't particularly thrilled with my existing counsel in that jurisdiction. So I gave her a couple of discrete projects, and she handled them very well. And skip ahead, end of the story is, she's now my counsel in that jurisdiction. And the way that she approached it was a very, very good reason for that, because she didn't assume, and she asked a lot of questions. So, learning what challenges your potential client faces and showing how you can bring value is a great approach. Research your potential client's business and industry. Ask them, what keeps you up at night. What sources of news, conferences, industry news, Law 360, whatever, to learn more about the legal issues that industry is facing. And so you come to it with more of an understanding of what that potential client actually needs in terms of legal services.
So, Mark, you've described a situation where there was a casual meeting at a professional conference, and it seemed very natural. Are there other ways? You're in the Sacramento area, right?
I am. The company is a little bit further north, in Yuba City, but yes, I'm in Sacramento.
Okay, so you're in one geographic area. You may have legal issues all over the country or all over everywhere prunes are eaten. You may have issues. Other than seeing you at these professional conferences, which take a great investment of time and money to attend, into conferences, for example, are often held in places like Singapore, which are great distances, great effort for Americans to get there. What are other things that outside counsel can do to have to try to initiate relationships with the general counsel?
It's a great question, because obviously, especially now that we're coming out of the pandemic, people are going to conferences again. That's obviously one way to do it. I'll tell you one way not to do it is don't send me if you read about, you get notification that my company is involved in litigation, a new lawsuit's been filed. Don't send me a 4-page email talking about how amazing you are and can absolutely handle this issue, and very, very hard sell in your approach for trying to be able to represent the company in this litigation. Instead, reach out with a very brief email. Say, hey, saw that you've been you've been sued, and can we schedule a time? We have some expertise in this area, but want to learn a little bit more about the dispute and how we might be able to help you. And can we have a call? Can we set up a call? That's a much better approach than, like I said, assuming that because perhaps your firm has a robust food and beverage department or class action defense, that you're automatically relevant to me and my company. Outside of that context, very similar approach. Do a bit of research in the potential client's industry. Who are the big players? Where does the potential client fit within that? And then reach out, and say, hey, I wanted to introduce myself. know a little bit about your industry, would love to learn more. Can we set up a call? Or if they're local, hey, could we have lunch? But again, come into it open-minded and asking questions, and not assuming that the expertise you have a lawyer is necessarily going to be relevant to your potential client.
And does it matter to you, Mark, whether those inquiries come from a brand name, AmLaw 200 kind of firm, as opposed to a firm which may be a very focused boutique in a jurisdiction 2 or 3 time zones away from you that you've never heard of?
That's another great question. The counsel I use, domestically, international, run the gamut from, big law all the way down to a 2-person firm in the Bay Area that I use for certain things. So the approach is the same, though. I remember at Jelly Belly, there was a mid-sized firm in the Bay Area that was trying to get work from us. Invited me and my associate general counsel out to lunch, and there was about, 4 or 5 of them. And it was very social. I mean, we obviously, they talked about their practice areas, but it was not, here's my practice area, and, therefore I can do this for you. It was more, this is my practice area. Have you guys, faced issues in that area? And then it was very much not a hard sell approach. They weren't assuming because, for example, one of the attorneys at the lunch had a trademark background, and I didn't have a need for any domestic trademark, any other domestic trademark counsel. But then she was just asking questions about the types of trademark issues that we were facing. Again, educating herself and not coming at it with, well, I've got this great trademark background and I can therefore, help you, without understanding what my needs were as general counsel in terms of an area where I needed assistance from outside counsel.
Mark,
So, yeah.
it almost sounds like dating advice. Don't talk about yourself. Ask good questions about to your date, about their life and their world.
It absolutely is, Jeff. That's a great analogy. Because again, you're trying to consummate a relationship. It's very similar in that regard. And coming at it with, again, talking about yourself and being very boisterous and not understanding what the other person is looking for, I think it's a great analogy.
Avoiding the trap we sometimes see in Hollywood, the great saying in Hollywood, Mark, but enough of me talking about myself. Why don't you talk about me for a while?
Exactly.
Mark, before we open it up to questions, let's just talk a little bit about mediation experience, good and bad, you may have had with mediation and mediators.
Sure.
Turn-ons and turn-offs. Go for it.
Number one would be having a mediator who is very well versed in the subject matter of the dispute. I can think of 2 right off the top of my head, a copyright dispute and a trademark dispute. And in the first one, the mediator was very well versed in copyright law and could absolutely, when one side was taking somewhat of maybe an absurd position because the law didn't support what they were, the position that they were taking, could call them out on that. Versus the trademark dispute that I'm thinking of, the mediator had very little trademark experience, and I was spending a great deal of time educating the mediator as to why, my client was taking the position they were taking because the law supported that. And so, I mean, they were coming at it with, traditional mediation techniques, but having the expertise and being able to, you're going to have more credibility if you're pushing a party to reach a particular settlement. you're gonna have a lot more credibility when you can say, because if you guys go to trial, you're not gonna get what you're asking for. So that would be number one. Number two, yeah, it's to be genial but professional. I've had a couple of mediators that were maybe a little bit too by the book in terms of almost acting like a judge would in terms of their demeanor. Very somewhat cold and standoffish. That's not going to help when you are trying to convince a party to accept a deal or to make a counteroffer. If you can establish a little bit more of a rapport with that, with the party and the counsel, that's going to be a more effective approach from what I've seen. So those would be my top two tips.
So you prefer warmth and competence.
Exactly.
Yeah. Amy Cuddy, the social psychologist at Harvard, has written a lot about those two dimensions of trust, warmth and competence, as being the keystones to being trusted and influential in situations where your expertise is called upon.
That's interesting. Yeah, I completely agree.
Very helpful stuff. Let's open it up. We have about 10 minutes left, and we've always had good and interesting questions from people in the audience. We have about 32 people here, so if you have a question, please either post it in the chat, or if you'd like simply to unmute yourself and ask your question, we would welcome it. Otherwise, we're going to have to talk about, what do you like better, prunes or apricots? And we all know prunes, so that's that. Jean, should we turn to you first?
Let me unmute myself. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being with us today. I liked what you said. It was very interesting, I thought, hearing about how attorneys, approach you for business and what flies there. How about this question? Do you get involved in the selection of the mediator for your matters, or do you leave that to counsel?
At this point, I would leave it to counsel, because I am relying on their expertise. I obviously have not been in private practice for some time. And so, the mediators that I was familiar with 10 years ago may not even be around anymore. And so I'm very much going to rely on my outside counsel, but I want them to explain why they're recommending a particular mediator over another. Obviously it's great if they've had prior experience with them and that was a good experience. Absent that they've done a little bit of homework with their colleagues who have had dealings with a particular mediator and can speak to it. I would be very uncomfortable going into a mediation not knowing anything about the mediator, in terms of no one having prior experience with them.
Sure, I totally understand that. The warmth that you talk about and the relationship with your outside counsel, I would assume, or I would expect, but maybe, what that would say about assumptions, do you treat it like a partnership, so to speak? Do you look at it that way with you and your counsel, your outside counsel?
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
And part of, I talked a lot about initially, trying to establish that relationship, but then there's also maintaining that relationship. And, just kind of reaching out, maybe they haven't heard from me in a while, just say, hey, how you been? What's going on? And yeah, my most effective relationships with outside counsel are, we do talk about interests, mutual interests. things outside of the work environment and what they're doing for me. And so very much so having more of a personal relationship, I think, is much more effective, or more preferential, I should say.
Mark,
Yeah.
let me ask a follow-up question about those calls. Hey, how you been? What's going on? I get those kind of calls. We all do from time to time from realtors, stockbrokers, and other people who we know are not the least bit interested in how we're doing or what's going on. They just want to know if we would like to list our house for sale, right?
Right.
What distinguishes effective from ineffective keeping in touch?
Wow. Obviously, if you already have established the relationship, that's going to be a big factor. Versus, yeah, I mean, I get, people reaching out to me on LinkedIn all the time, and financial advisors and whatnot, and wanting to talk about or ask questions, and it's like, I know where this is going. This is not maybe you're doing what I said in terms of asking questions, but I don't have a need for this service, versus I'll give you an example. Somebody reached out to me on LinkedIn, and they said, and they were from Canada, and they knew enough about my company. At the time, it was Jelly Belly, that we had a production facility in Thailand, and there's some changes happening in Canadian law that were going to affect food importation, and so that's how the approach it was. As you're probably aware, there's some changes, here. I noticed you have a position, in Thailand, and if you need any help in this area, I just wanted to let you know that I'm available. And that was a great approach. I mean, we actually already had the issue handled, but because of that approach, he obviously knew something, very relevant to my business, and obviously knew that it was going to affect, these changes were going to affect us, but approaching it in that way, as opposed to, more of a hard sell, she was much more effective. So, but back to your original question, yes, that technique is much more effective when you've already established it, have some relationship established, and it feels more genuine and not forced or contrived.
Yeah. We have a question in the chat from Neil Dilloff. Mark, can you describe to us any other mediator techniques that you have found to be particularly effective or ineffective?
Gosh, it's been so long since I've been involved in a mediation. Let me think back to.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Mark. There's some mediators out there who are come on very strong, swearing a lot, trying to show that their expertise is kind of overwhelming yours or outside counsel's. How do you respond? I assume you don't respond well when somebody tries to bully you into settling a case. How do you respond to that kind of mediator, or how might you respond to that kind of mediator in the moment, assuming, as I think is the case, that that kind of approach is not going to play very well with you?
You're correct. That approach is not going to play very well with me. That's sort of the extreme of when I was saying having a mediator who is well versed in the subject matter of the dispute, or in the law that's the background of the dispute, to come in and act like they know more than I do in this particular area. And I'm thinking back to a particular mediation where it was rather extensive. I think we were in there for about 11 hours total. And the mediator did start to get more aggressive in the end, towards the end. But that wasn't how they initially approached it. And I thought that the escalation was appropriate. My client, frankly, was they needed to hear it. And I was telling them obviously in a very different way, and it wasn't registering. And so having the mediator basically say the same thing, but in a more aggressive way, it was effective. But if the mediator had come out of the box with that attitude and that approach, it would have been very detrimental. So I think it can be effective. You have to be very careful about when you take that approach and to what degree.
It sounds like having established some rapport, trust, and confidence gave that mediator some license to be a little more aggressive. Whereas if it looked as if, well, this mediator just says this to everybody, he's just trying to scare us, might not have been as effective. Is that fair?
Definitely, absolutely. My client would have, if the mediator had come across like that initially, my client have said, we're done, we're out of here.
And how did the mediator in that circumstance toe the line between being more aggressive, as you described it, but not being belligerent or nasty or bullying?
They were forceful, and the other thing that was very effective, they pulled me aside separate from my client and said, "This is what I'm going to do. What do you think?" And so, basically, they got my sign off on taking that approach, and I would highly recommend that to anybody who's considering, a mediator who's taking a more aggressive approach. Talk to counsel ahead of time and say, I think this might be helpful. You tell me, you know your client better than I do. So that was very effective that they talked to me first about taking that approach.
Yes, sometimes those conversations take place on your way to or from the coffee machine. One of the advantages we had when we were doing more of our mediations in person, it's a little harder to pull somebody aside like that in the Zoom environment, although we
very much so.
Although we figured out some ways to do that. So that's that's also, Mark, why we like in so many cases having telephone calls or Zoom calls with the lawyers before the mediation, just to get that kind of information in advance, because sometimes on Zoom and sometimes even in person, it's very difficult to have those conversations in the flow of the mediation. I often tell people, I'd be curious to your view on this, your due diligence on mediators. One of the key questions you ought to be asking is whether you're comfortable having those kind of candid conversations with your mediator. And if you're not comfortable having those kind of candid conversations with your mediator, you probably picked the wrong mediator.
I think that's absolutely correct. You raised a good point, and I had forgotten. Even when we were doing in-persons, having the mediator reach out to me ahead of time, and just to get some, start establishing rapport, I thought was more effective than just coming in cold and not knowing anything about the mediator's approach heading in.
Yeah. Well, Mark, we thank you for the great rapport that you've established with our entire audience today. Invaluable information drawn on your many years of experience, both in the law firm world and inside counsel at Jelly Belly and at Sunsweet. So thank you very much. We encourage people to contribute to the Food Literacy Center, foodliteracycenter.org, foodliteracycenter.org. If people are in a position to contribute, we encourage them to do that. I personally encourage everybody to have a prune every now and then. I love them. And Mark, thank you so much for a wonderful session. With that, we are complete.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.